3, 2, 1. This is Hart Hagan with Let's Talk, and I'm joined by Rolf Friis. Rolf, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, Hart. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. So, looks like you've been downtown today. I wanted to hear from you about what's going on down there.
Yeah, I was down at 6th and Jefferson this morning for, I don't know, probably about 3 hours or so, for what was expected to be a big conflict down there between protesters. So I had to go get my camera on it and just kind of see what was going on. But the story goes that, of course, ever since, the Breonna Taylor, George Floyd situation, we've had daily protests, mainly around 6th and Jefferson at Jefferson Square Park down there. It's the hub. And, the word got around that an armed group of protesters was going to be there this morning, basically coming in, probably not too many locals with them. And basically we're coming to bully people out of Jefferson Square. And, just trying to kill the movement, essentially. They don't agree with the movement. They wanted to kill it. And so they were going to come down there. And, of course, the movement wasn't having it. So they organized their own counter-protest to the counter-protest. And they were ready. So I got there. And what I saw was the police took, like, garbage trucks, like dump truck type vehicles, blocked off the blocks around it. Then up and decks. So Jefferson Square was still taken over by the protesters that have been there, and then the other side was gated off for what would have been the other group. There were about a half dozen people in the other group, none of them armed. I'm not even sure everybody was with the other group as much as maybe just a couple random people hanging out over there. I never could tell. They didn't seem to be very active. They were just kind of hanging out over there. Meanwhile, on our side, a couple hundred people, plus all the tents down there, the tent city that's at Jefferson Square, everybody that's staying there. And they were prepared. So there was a lot of open carry there, a lot of open carry. I saw a lot of pistols on hips. I saw a lot of rifles on backs and across chests. I've personally never been to a protest like that. So, it's a little bit daunting beforehand. But I've seen a lot of videos of these types of protests in DC and Portland, Oregon, some other stuff. And, just go down there, try to be safe, show solidarity, get some video, and come home safe. And so from what I saw, everything was peaceful. All the guns at first were kind of nerve-wracking, but at the end of the day, they were just walking around being, they were the kind of their security guards, so to speak. So they had megaphones there just yelling at these police that were dividing Jefferson Street from Jefferson Park side to the other side. And, they're mostly taking this abuse pretty well, minus one officer in the middle who looked extremely anxious and nervous. And I pointed him out on camera a couple of times because I didn't know about that guy. He looked like a guy I'm not comfortable with having a gun and a badge, because you could just see in his face that he was, at a high level of stress, high level of anxiety, and just could not take people yelling at him. So hopefully he stayed calm after I left.
Can I get you off track for a minute? At the risk of getting you off track, I don't know if you saw in Jimmy Dore how that female cop who was in tears because you saw that. So let's try to this reminds me of that story. So let's try to tell that story a little bit, see if it relates to what you saw. So there's this video went viral on the internet. A female cop, she ordered an Egg McMuffin and coffee from McDonald's, and she gets her coffee and has to wait for the Egg McMuffin. And somehow this causes a meltdown, and it's like, what's happening in the world? Basically. So it's like, here's a person who's obviously, for one thing, it's a bad judgment call to put this on the video and upload it to the internet. If you're going to put it on video, then have your little meltdown on video and then take it home and save it for your own collection. But don't put it on the internet unless you have really bad judgment. And here's a person who has some signs of being emotionally unstable, and she has a gun. She has, you know, some signs of being completely self-involved and unable to empathize or sympathize with real suffering. So for her, suffering means having to wait for your Egg McMuffin because they're out to get you because you're a cop, because everybody's out to get cops these days. So is that a fair representation of that story?
Yeah, and it's actually what I've been thinking about. You know, the Officer Karen story there, you know, where she, oh my goodness, she had to wait for her food like every other customer at McDonald's. She actually was asked to pull up and wait for a minute. Oh no. Uh, you know, you have the Shake Shack incident with the 3 cops who claimed that they were poisoned, but it turns out that they weren't. There was another incident where somebody ordered on an app. I think it was a National Guardsman, and I don't remember what restaurant that was, but he ordered on an app and then complained about it afterwards, like he was being attacked, but you ordered on an app. Like, nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows you're in the National Guard. Like, nobody is messing with your food. And that, of course, that one turned out to be nothing. So, you know, we're seeing these not so strong-minded people with badges, with guns. They're really emotional. They can't deal with the stress and the anxiety. And, you know, they've got a gun on their hip and a badge to do whatever they want to do. So it's scary. So I'm thinking about that when I see this line of police and they're mostly calm, and you have this one officer in the middle who just looks extremely nervous, extremely anxious. He's looking around. He has this look on his face that's just not healthy, and it never changes. It's not like a moment here. It's like he was like that for a while, and none of the other officers are getting this guy off the line. So, you know, this guy's literally in the center of it.
Let me be devil's advocate here. So, you know, you're telling me that somebody that you saw, you didn't like the look on his face. And so devil's advocate says you're reading a bit much into that.
I mean, that's possible. It's always possible. I'm not CNN's body language expert or anything like that. But yeah, you can see a guy squirming around, you know, looking very uncomfortable. We know what those looks look like. We've all been around people who can't stand still because, you know, they don't want to be there. They're uncomfortable and they just want to go. And he was displaying all those signs. So you just didn't see that from the other officers, and you can see it in my video. Oh, by the way, anybody wants to check it out, it's on my Facebook page. I streamed it, the Louisville Proactivist Report, and it's almost 3 hours till my battery pretty much ran out, and I had to cut it. But you can see all this. I got several shots of
Say
the
it
officer.
loud and clear. How do we get in touch with you? How do we access your Facebook page, etc.?
Okay, yeah, it's the Louisville Proactivist Report. Proactivist is one word, and you can literally type in the Louisville Pro on Facebook, and it should pull it up. And it should be my last post, I believe, last video. I'm also, you can do the same thing, YouTube and Twitter, but this particular live stream I did through Facebook, and that's where. And yeah, you can. I have all the crowd on camera, the police, the speeches, you know, the leaders, the whole setup, and you know, I just let it go. I did a couple interviews on camera as well down there. So basically the complete package. If you want to know what was going on with that today, definitely check that out. If you're listening to us today and you want to see what we're talking about, definitely go and check that out and see for yourself. Don't let other people tell you what did or didn't happen down there. You know, check it out with your own eyes.
What else do you want to tell us about what happened down there? Well, let me give an expression, or let me share something and get your reaction to it. So I was really concerned when I saw reports about this counter, what do you call it, counter protest. And I thought, if I were the leader, if I were a Martin Luther King or somebody who had the ear of people, and if people were responsive to me, I would say, let's not go to this. Let's boycott this. I mean, that's one, and I wasn't even sure about that, but I felt, I don't feel like I think I'm not a complete pacifist. I think there's a time to defend yourself. I think there's a time when a military defense is justified. I don't think violent protest is productive at all. In fact, I think it's counterproductive. I think you should stay away from just on strictly pragmatic grounds. Not that I don't want to pinch some people's heads off, but strictly on pragmatic grounds. Stay away from the violence, because it's like Jimmy Dore said. It's probably somebody said this before him, but chaos favors the establishment. You know, the establishment is going to take chaos and crack down. That chaos and violence legitimize the use of police force. Chaos and violence legitimize the militarization of police. So I say, you know, stay away from all forms of violent protest. And I just didn't think there was anything to be gained from getting confrontational with people who have guns, you know. So, but that was my perspective. And now you're saying that the counter protest didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, again, I left after 3 hours. So there were, at one point there was word that they were on their way, supposedly 65 people. I don't know where the information came from or how it was, but I didn't get the vibe that they were coming. I do believe there were probably some provocateurs in the crowd walking around. There were snipers up on the roof around the whole area and helicopters. But yeah, I didn't see, you know, I don't know if they were trolling us, as in trying to get us to believe that they were going to show up, and then when they had no intention to, or if they were just cowardly, or maybe they had full intentions, but they just don't have the popular support that they think they have, you know, and, you know, come time to protest, you know, there was nobody there. So, but it's, you know, it's weird because I don't believe in violent protest. You know, it definitely can hurt the movement and backfire. But at the same time, I don't believe in out of town people coming in and bullying us as a community off of our spot. Like
Right.
the people protesting at 6th and Jefferson are Louisvillians. And we're protesting about something that happened to a Louisvillian. And these people are coming from out of town to run us out of there and to say, you know, they don't like what we're doing. And so that puts you in a tough situation. You know, it could be dangerous if these guys show up. But do we let them run us off? And if we do, then where's the movement go from there? So it's a tough choice for a lot of people. And so I can understand why a lot of people would not want to go to that. It's, you know, it is scary, the thought of what could happen there. But I also understand why some people will not be moved.
Let's talk about provocateurs for a minute. So
Okay.
Pretend I don't know anything. What is a provocateur, and why are they there? So those are two questions. What is a provocateur and why are they there in theory?
Okay. Agent provocateurs are people who, when you're at a protest, a rally, some kind of march, some type of event like that, these people are basically placed there to look like one of the marchers, one of the protesters. Basically to get inside information, or who knows, you know, it can be various things, but basically to get inside information and be there for the other side. So a lot of times these can be off-duty police officers or officers from another city. These can be, you know, people paid by the FBI or CIA. We know that happens.
Yeah.
From what I hear at these large rallies, that you can expect about 1 in 6 of the people there to be provocateurs or to not be what they're pretending to be. 1 in 6 seems like a bit much, at least here in Louisville. I don't, you know, I go to these events. I'm not sure that 1 out of every 6 people I'm looking at is a provocateur, but they're definitely there. And sometimes they stick out like a sore thumb, and you know, you see a big roided up officer trying to wear some concert T-shirt or something, looking like a regular guy, and it's like, and he's very serious and not wanting to be there. It's like, yeah, this is probably not a real protester here. You know, this guy's here because he's being paid to be here, and he wants to be somewhere else fishing or something right now. That's for sure. Uh, but you get them, and so they're there to gain information. They're also there to delegitimize. So you have the type of agent provocateurs that are there to cause vandalism and destruction and violence, and possibly even loot, but mostly violence and destruction. So they're there. You'll see these people spray painting buildings, breaking windows, smashing cars, that kind of thing. But these aren't protesters. They don't care about why anybody's there. They're not there to stand for a cause. They're basically there to make that cause look violent, look bad, and to keep that cause from getting support through that. Because if you turn on mainstream media of a peaceful rally and then one guy smashes a window and the only thing the media shows you is somebody smashing a window and not the other 3-4 hours of peaceful rally, you're going to assume that this is nothing but a bunch of crazy people destroying property. Why would we ever support this cause that they're doing when they're not serious about it? They're just there to loot, riot and steal, but it's just not the case. I'll say it before and I'll say it again. Protesters go to protests to protest. That's why they're there. That's why I'm there. Nobody goes to cause trouble. Nobody's going to spray paint stuff and break stuff and steal stuff. People are dying in the community. We're trying to put a stop to that. But with that comes large gatherings, comes potential chaos. And when that happens, that's when the provocateurs can do what they do, start breaking stuff. And then that's when the news does its thing and just tries to make us look like a bunch of violent criminals, basically, and not actual protesters. So, provocateurs are a problem. They can be hard to point out.
Well, let me stop you there. So there was an incident. I don't remember the exact date, but I know it was a Thursday, approximately 3 weeks ago, and 7 people were shot. And to my knowledge, nobody ever found out who did that. And so, am I right about that? That hasn't been solved yet. Okay, so
to my knowledge, I haven't seen it. Yeah.
And so if it hasn't been solved, that leads me to believe that the person was a professional. How do you shoot 7 people in a crowd and not be seen unless you are, you're a professional, you're not just a random person shooting people up for whatever reason. Anyway, so am I on the right track about that or the wrong track?
Yeah. Now, we can't say 100% without a doubt that that was a provocateur. I mean, we can't prove that without a doubt, but that has all the earmarks of what a provocateur does. They could turn out, that's not the case. There's just maybe some dumb person down there doing something stupid. I don't know, but probably a provocateur in that case, because they seem to lock up other people real quick. But this person's, just kind of flew through. So, that could have been an off-duty officer. That could have been an off-duty FBI agent. It's hard to say. I mean, like I say, we know these things happen. One of the ones that we saw on camera was with the start of the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis with the AutoZone. That was like day one where the AutoZone got destroyed and everybody wanted to talk bad about the protests, say they're rioters, they're looters, they're violent, they destroyed an AutoZone in their community. Then it comes out, there's some, cell phone camera footage of this guy. He's fully covered up. He's in all black. He's muscled up. And he's coming over and he's got some kind of tool in his hand and he smashes all the windows out of the AutoZone. And the person filming is asking him, "Are you a cop? Are you a cop?" And he just swats at the screen like you see a cop do at a rally or something when they just want somebody away, and then leaves. Now, this guy is clearly not a protester. He didn't come down there to protest. He was by himself, covered up head to toe.
And not a looter either.
Right. Obviously not a looter.
He's a vandal. He's a violent person. He's a vandal. He's assaulting property, if not people, but he's not a looter in the sense of wanting to get valuable goods out of the store.
Right. He wasn't trying to line his pockets with anything. He was trying to destroy the AutoZone in the middle of the protests that are right by the AutoZone. So
Okay,
this
so
guy,
tell me, give me a theory for who's paying this guy, or
this particular one,
what is his motivation? I mean, you don't have to be right. Just give me a plausible theory about where this comes from.
well, what's interesting is with that particular case, there was some of his face showing on camera. There, he was identified on Twitter by his ex-wife as a St. Paul police officer. So this is Minneapolis. So that's the Twin Cities. So that's their, their sister city essentially. So this is, if, assuming she's just not some vindictive lady, assuming she actually, even with some face covering, can definitely identify her ex as, you would expect to be able to do that. If she's right, then, this is the brotherhood, the thin blue line. He's coming to help his guys. He's off duty. He's not in his community. He's hoping nobody will recognize him. And so that is probably paid by the police. I would say the Minneapolis police, or,
So what's
even
his
the,
motivation?
is
What's the
to make,
motivation of him or the people paying him? Either one. What are they trying to do?
because with that particular case, George Floyd had just been murdered by Officer Chauvin in Minneapolis, and the city is angry. So that's when everything first kicked off. That was the first night, I believe, possibly the second. I'm pretty sure it was the first night. So what they want to do is they don't want this to gain any legitimacy. They don't want these protests. They don't want the people of the community who aren't protesting to see this and say, oh my goodness, they're so right. I need to get down there. I need to join this. We need to make this protest bigger. So they want to make that protest look bad. You can do that by making it look like it's not a protest at all. It's just people acting out. It's people being violent. It's people being vandals. It's people stealing. So this guy smashes out of AutoZone, and then what was all over the news the next day? Oh, these violent people, these violent looters, they're destroying their own communities. Like, we all can agree what happened to George Floyd was bad, but destroying your communities doesn't help, and we shouldn't support you. So that's what happens. But again, this guy was clearly not a protester. He was not there for George Floyd, and he was not a part of the group. This is just some outside guy who came in, went straight to the AutoZone, smashed the windows out, and immediately left the scene. That's literally what he was there. And this is a grown man. This is a big grown man. This is not some kid, not some teenager playing pranks. So that's what that does. It just kills the legitimacy. They want to. Anytime there's a major protest, they want to distract from the point of the protest and just kind of kill off the protest and make sure it goes nowhere, and doing that by
So
making everybody look violent and bad.
what I hear
And
you saying is that the police are, in some instances, the police are willing to go in undercover, do illegal things, including property damage, so as to get a photo op for the media, so as to legitimize their jobs and their funding.
yes, although in this case, I don't think he was trying to photo op. I think he tried to be sneaky, and there just happened to be like these 2-3 friends or whatever hanging out over there, and one of them had a cell phone going, and caught him off guard and got him right on camera. So he would, I don't think he wanted to be caught. I might be wrong about that. I think
Right,
he
he
just
didn't want
tried
to be
to,
caught. He didn't want
yeah,
to be caught, but the photo op is to capture the property damage.
right, yeah. So he just wanted to come in and get out and then just leave a damaged store there. That's what he was trying to do. But luckily we got it on camera, or we'd never know. And this, but of course the media still runs with this, like his ex-wife didn't identify him, or at least, interview her and vet her story. At the very least, if you're CNN and MSNBC and these people, or your local 4-letter networks in Minneapolis, bring this lady on and confirm it or don't confirm it, But even if it turns out that that's not her husband, this is clearly a big bulked up dude dressed in all black, covered up, trying to sneak in and out. So yeah, that doesn't even delegitimize it if it turns out it's not her ex, and it's just, he moved like a cop, he looked like a cop, he acted like it. I'd say that's probably her ex. Regardless, though, it was successful because they never switched the narrative after that. They never went back. The media.
What kind of
When I say
face covering did he have?
oh man, I'm trying to remember. It's what was this, 3-4 weeks ago? It's hard to say, but I know he was all black. Everything he had on was black. But I don't remember exactly if it was like a
What
face mask
was his face covered? He had some kind of covering on his face.
yeah, but like his eyes and stuff
Yeah.
were visible like
Okay.
that. So, I believe that's what the ex-wife was going on. And,
Well,
we can debate
let's
that, but
talk
I think
about.
most people can identify their ex by their eyes. I
Right.
would
Sure.
think.
Sure. So I've got another kind of situation to explore, and that is, I think it was either that day or the next day when our friend Jake Bush was there.
Hmm.
The situation he described was as follows. The stage one of the protest, the protesters were disciplined and on message, and I don't know how Jake knew this or perceived this, but he said at the same time the cops seemed undisciplined. I don't know what he meant by that, but it made it sound like they seemed agitated. And anyway, I wouldn't expect a skeptical viewer to put much stock in that particular part. But if stage one, protesters are disciplined and on message. Stage two, cops use their shield, and in formation, they try to move the protesters in a pincher movement into 4th Street Live. The pincher movement is a battlefield motion where you're kind of got people, you've got a V formation and you're closing the V. That's a pincher movement. And so that caused chaos, and that's when the property damage started. And you have the cops there with all of this firepower. You have the full legitimacy of the state saying they can handcuff and arrest people if they so choose, but they're not arresting people for property damage. They're not preventing property damage. They're just standing there allowing the property damage to occur for the cameras.
Yes.
I'm not saying that is the only true version of those events. I'm saying that's the version I heard, and I tend to believe it. I would be willing to be corrected if somebody came in with a different point of view on that. But the version of the story I heard and believed seems to indicate that the cops were trying to cause chaos. And when the chaos and the property damage started to occur, they stood by and did nothing about it, because that's the photo op. So
Yeah.
so I've been talk to me. Yeah.
So I've been watching these videos from Minneapolis, New York, Philadelphia, LA, so on and so forth. And that's it. You see time and again, you see on video people saying I'm a journalist and then getting shot in the face, pepper sprayed, arrested. You see people time and again on video protesting peacefully. Then you see time and again damage and looting and vandalism. But if you pay attention to those videos, a lot of them, you will see police in those videos standing down or standing to the side, standing in the back. They are looking at the violence that's being done. They're watching a building getting burned or a car window get smashed out or whatever it is, something getting spray painted, a business, and they're just standing there. So why are they cracking down on the peaceful protesters and the journalists, but they're leaving the looters and the vandals? And that's exactly it. That's, again, they're trying to discredit the protest by getting people who aren't there to believe that these aren't protests. This is just violence. These are upset people breaking stuff, smashing stuff, stealing stuff. Young people just wanting to have fun, wanting to act out. But they want you to forget that Breonna Taylor was killed in her sleep, that George Floyd had a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds until he couldn't breathe anymore and never came home. They want to take all the onus off that. So you see the media talking more about a broken window or a burned down building than they do somebody's life. Somebody who's never going to see their family again. Somebody who never, left home and didn't come home again. Somebody who went to bed and never got up again. We don't want to talk about that stuff. So we're going to talk about, the violence. And it's really frustrating. We need a better media. It's one of the reasons why I go down and I try to cover this stuff. And I've done 2 very long videos now. The one this morning and the one a couple weeks ago. And the one a couple weeks ago, there were no police there at all. And there was not one moment of violence, nothing, not one. And this morning, there was no moments of violence. So, I can't compete with CNN and views, but if you see my video, you can see that there's just no violence. I got all the protests. I'm covering all the angles, and you're not seeing it. I'm covering the march before a couple of weeks ago, and there's nothing. You can see everybody being respectful. Even while marching and eating a candy bar, you will see somebody walk over to a garbage can and throw the wrapper away. They're not even throwing wrappers on the ground. You know what I mean? And but we're a bunch of violent thugs that are just tearing our own communities down and rampaging through the streets and whatnot, according to the media.
Well, why do you think? Okay, so why do you think the media is like that? I mean, what you're saying, their reporting is not accurate, and that there's something systemic or systematic about the reporting and not being accurate. You seem to be saying that it's not just a legitimate error, it's not just an understandable bias. So what's the nature of the reporting, and how does it need to change, and how can we change that?
So with the media, we kind of know them as the fourth estate because they're there as kind of the fourth branch of the government, there to hold the government accountable and to keep things transparent. So the media should be a watchdog, but unfortunately, they're not watchdogs. They're more like lap dogs and oftentimes attack dogs. So they are there basically to present. I mean, there's a lot of things, but as far as, in this context, they're there to basically work with the establishment and to kowtow to the establishment and present their side. So the establishment says, this is our system. We've had this policing system for decades. This is what we want to do. We know some people are upset about it. We don't really care. We don't want to change. So when people are protesting this stuff, we need you to not frame this. And that's a big key with media in general, not just this, but just anything, is watch how they frame something. You can tell a story, and the way you tell that story may affect, how people perceive that story. But if you tell that story and frame it in a different way, you might get a completely different reaction from your audience. So you will see the way that people frame this. And the framing we're talking about is, of course, focusing on the looters, focusing on the rioters, ignoring the peaceful protests, ignoring what they're even protesting about. And that's that framing that you get, that it's more important that AutoZone in Minneapolis lost its window because AutoZone had a window smashed out. People are in the streets because George Floyd isn't alive anymore, and he was killed by an officer on camera, knowingly on camera. So anything that they can do to kill the popularity of these protests. And so where do people go? They go to the cable news and oftentimes the local 4-letter networks. And they're not as bad, but they have mostly the same owners as well. So it's all homogenized news. So they all have the same owners at the end of the day. We have 6 owners of our mainstream media. I believe it's 92% of our media is owned by 6 people. So you get the same framing or 2 versions of framing
it's
that
down
are
to
acceptable.
4. It's down, according to Wikipedia, it's down to 4.
Down to 4 now?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's even worse. That's even worse. It'll eventually be down to 1 or 2. It's going to happen. If Amazon doesn't just come in there and buy everybody up, or Disney or whoever. But yeah, these media moguls, they tell you what their framing is going to be. They tell all their local outlets, and that's what you get. And it's about protecting the system, which is the police. It's about protecting the parties and the 2-party system. And you know, any kind of difference of opinion has to be Republican versus Democrat. You're not allowed any other kind of difference of opinion. You have to fall in that spectrum of debate. But there's really
So, okay, Rolf, what we're getting into now is media analysis. And when you think media analysis, Noam Chomsky is one of the main leaders in, media analysis. Like he had, and his theory called manufacturing consent has that, okay, so what is the media not? The media is not a nonprofit for the most part. We're talking about commercial media. The media is not a public service. The media is a business, so there's that profit motive. And not only that, but the big corporate media, which owns 90% of all media, is owned by corporate media. We're talking about monopolies because we have the media that's in the hands of a very, very few people. There was a time, a long time, when there were restrictions on one person or corporation owning too many different media outlets. If you're a movie producer, you couldn't own movie theaters and that kind of thing. If you owned a TV network, you couldn't own a TV station, that kind of thing. Well, a lot of those restrictions came down with the Communications Act of 1996, and that's why we have a lot of monopoly power. So when you talk about media, for one thing, it's a business. For one thing, it's it's monopoly, so there's not very much competition. For another thing, it's corporate. We're not just talking about small businesses, we're talking about big businesses. So these big businesses have customers. They're businesses, therefore they rely on revenues. The revenues come from somebody. The revenues come from what we call sponsors. And so whoever sponsors advertising you don't get to say very many bad things about, don't bite the hand that feeds you. If the military industrial complex in all its forms is advertising on your network, then you're not going to say very many bad things about them. One of Noam Chomsky's theory, one of the 5 filters is sponsorship. Another one of the 5 filters is you have to be good to your sources, and that's called access. So James Miller is a teacher at a local high school who we did some programming and we talked about this. He talks about the local media. They're very beholden to the police as a source. So they have to be nice to their sources because you have to be nice to your sources for your sources to continue to feed you information. So at the national level, you have the Pentagon feeding a lot of easily repeated information to the cable news, to New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. That gives them stuff that's easy to report, easy to convey. At the local level, if you're a news reporter, you have to rely on the police for a lot of the stuff that you get to report. So anyway, I just wanted to throw some of that out there. The media can never be expected. Everybody has a bias and nobody's perfect. We're not expecting anybody to not have a bias. We're not expecting anybody to be perfect. But most people don't understand that there's a systemic problem with who reports the news, how they report it, and why they report it. So I wonder if we could think about how that works. What are the different societal values that have been created out of decades and centuries of reporting about this? I would say that people like the average news viewer is conditioned and trained to value property over people because property is sacred in our system, and in our system, a lot of people have made a lot of effort to not be racist on an interpersonal level, and I think that's genuine and that's sincere. But we live in a country that is profoundly racist, and there's this tendency to value property over the lives of people of color. Am I on, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I want to touch on two things that you were talking about there. So what happened with the media in the 1980s is it discovered it could be profitable because it didn't know that beforehand. And that happened when 60 Minutes reached number one as the number one overall most viewed show. And so they started raking in advertising dollars, and it kicked off the whole movement, so to speak, from the media to try to make money instead of just inform. And so now you have this model where they're bringing in money hand over fist through advertising, and you're watching some of these corporations advertise that you can't even purchase anything from, like the military industrial companies, like a Northrop Grumman or a Boeing.
Right. I want to buy a plane. I want to buy a submarine.
Yeah,
and they're advertising. What are they advertising? Are they selling products? Are they selling weapons?
That's exactly it. So they're running commercials on there where they're not specifically selling anything. They're just saying, "Hey, Boeing is great, right? Boeing, Boeing," and then lo and behold, that station that's running these Boeing commercials never talks bad about Boeing. 737 Max has all kinds of problems, but you don't find out about it through that station because Boeing spent all this money on advertising for a product that they don't even have to sell. And the average person watching
737 Max is this Boeing plane. What, a couple of them crashed? Two of them crashed, killing hundreds of people each.
And I think they grounded them, and I don't think they've ungrounded them since then. That was last year. They basically took a bunch of shortcuts, I guess, building this piece of crap and put people's lives in danger with this. And so I've flown a lot in my life, and I've flown on a lot of Boeings. I thought, that they made stuff, but apparently, made safe vehicles. But, I guess that's kind of gone down the tube over the drain, or gone down the drain over the years to where doesn't seem to be important to them because they can just pay for this positive coverage, or pay to make negative coverage not happen or disappear.
Or control the narrative.
Exactly. So that's what they're buying, and that's where the profit motive comes from, which leads me to my second point of access and what I was talking about earlier. Supposed to be a watchdog, but now they're a lapdog. So instead of holding accountability, the police force or our politicians or leaders in the community, that when they do get them on, they throw them softball questions. They're really nice with them. They kick around jokes, and what they're wanting is access.
Let me say something about that. So the reputation that the media wants, they believe, many of them believe this about themselves, and they want us to believe that they are adversarial and that they are challenging. Their job is to challenge power, and they do a pretty good job of challenging power. So that would be a watchdog, but you're saying that they're not watchdogs, that in fact they're lapdogs and sometimes attack dogs.
Exactly.
And they're not attacking power, they're attacking people who try to bring power into alignment.
Right. Or you can even see it in an election where there's a people-powered grassroots candidate against an establishment candidate.
Yeah.
And, that grassroots candidate probably won't get coverage. But if they do get coverage, it's not going to be positive.
So how does that work, and why is it that way?
Why is it that way? It's because they're part of power. So you have a 1% that's controlling the country. And when you look at these anchors, these Rachel Maddows, these Hannitys, and these people, they're making massive amounts of money. They are 1%. They are in that bubble. They are not in our bubble as far as the regular citizen. So they can't relate to us. And they're surrounded by nothing but these millionaires and billionaires that none of these people have a clue. So they can't, what's news to us might not be news to them and vice versa. So, some of these things that affect a billionaire, I really don't care about and don't want to see on the news. I need to see, what's going on in the community. What happened with these bills that got passed today or didn't get passed? What happened with this police incident, in the neighborhood? I need to know about these things. I don't care about your little I don't even know what the word is. Their
Well,
agenda.
let me give you an example of that. As far as their world is not our world. Rachel Maddow and people on Fox News, people on CNN, and the supposedly left-leaning media is just as bad about this as the supposedly right-wing media. But health insurance, we're dealing. There are people who don't have to worry about health care being paid for. They have a good, just like the people in Congress, the people in Congress are on a national health care plan, but they don't want the same thing for the rest of us. The people like Rachel Maddow at least tolerate the fact that the Democratic Party does not want to support health care for everybody. They just want to give lip service to it sometimes. And arguably, part of that is that they're caught in a system that, follow the money. The health insurance companies sponsor the presidential debates. The health insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies sponsor the cable news, and they don't want reform. I mean, the companies don't want reform, and they're paying a lot of money to media companies. So you have the systemic nature of money, and you also have the people that are reporting the news just don't have to worry about money in their lives. So they can't relate to people who have to go without health care, have to ration their insulin, who have to deal with a sick child, who have to deal with lawyers before doctors, who have to get a wallet biopsy when they go into the hospital, because it all depends on what you can pay for or what you can't pay for. You're talking to the doctor about what treatment you need, and you can't make decisions because every decision is a financial decision, as if you should have to deal with that when you're trying to get well.
Yeah, and healthcare is a perfect example of this whole watchdog versus attack dog that we see from the media. You can look at Medicare for all. So for a proper media with healthcare in this country as a watchdog would be asking our elected officials, hey, does all this money you're getting from pharmaceutical companies affect the fact that we don't get Medicare for all? We know that Medicare for all covers everybody for less and is the system run by every other first world country, and their systems are better than ours nowadays. Why can't we get Medicare for all? What is holding this back? Is it the fact that this pharmaceutical company has donated this many tens of thousands of dollars to your campaign? Is that, that's what a watchdog would do. But instead they go attack dog, and they want to, attack Medicare for all.
Because how do they do that? Here's my answer. I'm going to answer my own question. How do they do that? And in one sentence, how are you going to pay for it? So Joe Biden's on national TV, not being called out for claiming falsely and misleadingly that Medicare for all would cost $34 trillion. Not to say it's not about how, in reality, it's not about how to pay for Medicare for all. It's about how to pay for the system. We can't afford the system that we have. So he's acting like this, so what's wrong with that reason? But it's one question, and it's like, how are you going to pay for this? If you want something for people, you always get confronted with the question, how are you going to pay for it? Like, you have to have a perfect plan in place if you're going to do anything, and it has to cost nothing if you're going to do anything for people. But they're not asking, how do you pay for the Pentagon budget? Every man, woman, and child in America pays $4,000 per year for the Pentagon, and there's a lot of hidden costs that go along with that. How do we pay for the healthcare system that we have? But that's not but why is the media always challenging the pro-people programs, and they're never challenging the military-industrial complex or the health insurance companies or big food? God, don't get me started on food.
Yeah, and these health insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies are, donating campaigns and buying ad time and assuring that they don't get attack dogged. just lapdog. So, um, so yeah, you see that framing with Medicare for all. You know, how are you going to pay for this? And they'll bring up a set amount, but they always, and I mean always, fail to mention what we currently pay, and it's
Yeah.
more expensive.
Right.
They try to frame it as in this cost of Medicare for all is like what we're paying now. Add this to that, but that's not how that works. If we change a system, what we were paying goes away and it gets replaced by the new system. So it's not so many trillion on top of so many trillion. It's getting rid of these trillions and adding these, which by the way is less. It's
Right.
less.
Yeah,
So,
how
but
could
they
we
don't put it
afford to
that way.
save money? We can't, Rolf, we can't afford to save money. Saving money is too expensive.
It's a crazy idea, isn't it? But that's that framing. That's the type of framing that you get in the way that a question is asked, or which question is asked, or which questions are not asked.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big one too. You know, framing by omission. So it's a serious issue, Hart. Do you think that our mainstream media is redeemable? Are we going to be able to change it, or do we just have to make them go the way of the dodo and just take over with independent media? I mean, I don't know if it's salvageable or not. What do you think?
Well, you know, if I was king of the world, it's like that's the question that I ask. If you were king of the world, what would you do? If you were king of the year, you won't be, but, you know, that's like saying, what policy would you put in place if there were no political obstacles to it? So so there, you know, there might be about a half dozen things that I would suggest that would collectively solve most of this problem, I believe. One of them would be, you got to deal with monopolies. We have problems with monopolies in every industry. Monopolies have not been challenged to speak of since 1981 when Reagan got in office. So we need to deal with monopolies. We need to break up monopolies. And so that's one, so that there is more competition, not only so that there's more competition, but so that when you break up a monopoly into separate companies, each of the companies is like no longer has all of this power and all this money when it comes to lobbying Congress. So we have to deal with monopolies. Another thing is that this is hard to articulate. I have a whole list of things that you can call it unprofitable. I was going to do an episode once called Unprofitable. There's so many things that are unprofitable. And that's why we don't do them, because profits rule. One of the things that's unprofitable, it's like, well, take NPR. NPR was supposed to be it was supposed to have public-oriented programming. And it turned out to be, it was always a little bit commercial, but Reagan got in office and decreased their funding and allowed them to advertise more. So I consider NPR and PBS to their commercial outlets. But what if we were to increase the funding and say, you're not going to have commercials. We're going to give you more funding and you're not going to have commercials. It would be, you know, some people say, how would you pay for that? I say, how do we pay for not having a functioning media? A democracy requires a functioning media. So, you know, NPR coverage has been called National Petroleum Radio. It's like the Koch brothers give to it. One of the Koch brothers, presumably the one still living, is on. David Koch is on the board of either NPR or PBS. And you know, that keeps them from doing the reporting that's needed. So that's a model. It's like we have in place a model that would work. Plus, we could do a separate episode on that. I wish we had more time and I were a bit more prepared to talk about this. But there needs to be some way of supporting independent media. And it might not mean financial support, but look at all the technology that we have. Generally speaking, the technology that we have, it has some spin-off that people enjoy, like our iPhones and stuff. I'm glad we have that stuff. But the technology that we have was developed at taxpayer expense for Pentagon, and for NASA. Most, and some through the National Institutes of Health and that kind of thing. But most of the technology that we have was developed for the military-industrial complex, and even containerization and logistics. A lot of that software and hardware was developed for the Navy. And then when something is developed by the government, it naturally becomes useful for big companies. And it also, you have automation, which naturally devalues the employee. So you empower management, you devalue the employee, you de-skill the employee. And that's the nature of most of our technology, because there is not any democratic control over how technology is used, or what technology we decide to develop. So I'm just saying that there's a whole lot of opportunity to empower local people, to empower workers, to empower communities, if that's the focus. And can you help me think of maybe I'm blowing smoke. I'd just like to give kind of a concrete example of how that could empower, like, part-time journalists like you and me, not getting paid a thin dime for this, but yet presumably providing a valuable service, because what we're saying is not crap, and it's not a corporate agenda coming through. It's just concerned citizens wanting to do something for the community.
Right. And just as a side note, with the way that the media is right now, we probably need to take a look at our main journalistic schools, because they're putting out these types of journalists on a consistent basis now, and that's really the only type they're putting out. So, the Syracuses of the world and some of these Ivy League, Yale, Harvard, and their programs and stuff, it's, they're not, I don't know what I've never been to journalism school, but if it's turning out these kinds of people, I don't see where I could go and get any benefit out of it, because these people aren't journalists. They're just kind of learning. I don't really know what it is they're learning. I guess how to get access. So that's a major problem that we need to look at, is these schools, what they're doing nowadays. And maybe it was different before, years ago, but
we've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I just don't see where they're turning out journalists at this point. So I don't know what's going on in these journalism schools, but they need to be, reset from the beginning. Because when people like you and me are doing better journalism with no training than somebody making $30,000 a day on cable news, there's something wrong with that system. We should never be able to outdo them from our living rooms than what they do with a massive corporation behind them, and supposedly all these reporters, resources, and tech experts, and this and that. It's bad.
Well, to me, the root of the problem is corporate power, and like when you're talking about these journalism schools, I'm saying whoever wants to be a journalist you have to get a job, and you end up working for a corporation that has a corporate agenda. And I like saying that I used to be an evangelical Christian, and at the time I believed in a literal Satan, and I don't believe in a literal Satan anymore. But the Bible does say that the love of money is the root of all evil, and I swear the accumulation of money, it has a pernicious, insidious effect on our world. And you have to somehow, and democracy totally goes against that. The miracle is that there's ever any democracy. That's the miracle, because democracy was a natural state with the indigenous tribes. But it's when you start introducing property and money and power into the equation, then then that property and that money and the power and the military might that goes along with it easily it easily overpowers democracy. All you need to destroy democracy is enough guns shooting enough people, and you can destroy democracy. And you can buy guns with money. So I wish I could end on a lighter note. We're going to have to end it in just a minute, but give you the last word. Is there anything there that resonates with you?
Yeah, I think I pretty much got all my points out today. But yeah, when you're consuming your media, just pay attention to the framing. Watch how they ask these people questions, what questions they're asking, what questions they aren't asking. Does it line up with the questions in your head? Is there stuff that you really want to know and it doesn't get asked? So just pay attention. Don't let these fancy suits and their $300 haircuts or whatever, confuse you. These people are not truth tellers to you. So do your own research. Always think critically, and that's all I got to say about it.
I want to bounce off that and then we'll end. And that is, Noam Chomsky describes his work as a course in intellectual self-defense. So intellectual self-defense is basically when you get another perspective and you're basically getting the truth as opposed to all the crap and propaganda. So hopefully we've given our listeners a way of getting a little bit closer to the truth. And hopefully this can be characterized as a course in intellectual self-defense. And I appreciate you joining me in that, Rolf. You do great work. And we're going to sign off now. Have a great day.
Thank you, Hart. Thank you, man.
Okay, bye-bye.